Rachel Newhouse, a Cal Poly student, was reported missing.
Andrea Crawford was abducted from her apartment.
A second adult female body was recovered.
The infamous murder case on the Central Coast is gaining national attention again.
The FBI was even called in to provide manpower.
Just coming to San Luis and standing on the street corner and seeing someone walk by, it's like you just say, I wonder if that's him.
Hi everyone, welcome to True Crime Wine Wednesday. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single upload. I can confidently say that this video is not arriving to you on a Wednesday. It would have had I not lost all of the audio on the recording because I already did the video and an audio didn't take. And you can either just freak the F out about it, or you can have the sip of a Tempo Gin Smash and move on. That's what we're gonna do today. We're also switching things up a little bit, filming in front of the podcast and viewer submission wall. I love this little zone, so we're showing it some love today too. All right, let's get started. Before we do, I have a quick message for you. I want to give a big, massive thank you to our sponsor today, June's Journey. I'm so pumped about this. Before I even get into it, if you don't know what June's Journey is, it's a hidden object mystery game set in the 1920s where June Parker is on a mission to solve her sister's murder. This game is made for us Sippendales. You get to unravel the mystery while looking for clues, all while meeting new characters and then traveling through different scenes. It's always keeping you really engaged, which I love, but you're still relaxed. It's like stepping into my favorite era in the 1920s, solving a mystery, feeling challenged in the sense that you're looking for clues, but you're not feeling overwhelmed because it's too challenging, if that makes sense. I personally love hopping on while I'm trying to just wind down for the day, sipping on a glass of vino. It always feels like the perfect escape. And then when I'm done, I also feel like I've accomplished something because I feel like I'm keeping my brain sharp. If you are a game lover too, you absolutely have to check it out. All you have to do is download June's Journey for free in the description below. You can download it for free on your phone or tablet and also on your desktop through Amazon or Facebook. Thank you again so much, June's Journey, for making us feel like we truly are the sleuths that we believe we are. Okay, riddle time. A girl throws a ball as hard as she can. It comes back to her even though nothing or nobody touches it. How? Okay, grab your drinks, grab your snack, grab your bubble bath. I'm having a bevy with you tonight. I've seen a few of you say you've missed having, a little sip with me, and I've missed it too. I just know there are a lot of people who watch who are maybe in recovery or don't drink or they're underage. So I wanted to be sensitive to that. But I know if you fall under that category, you always just grab your favorite snacks or whatever you're drinking and you join, and I love that. But I just want you to know, if you're having a tea or a water or a soda or maybe a little puff, you are still just as much of a Sippendale as the rest of us. I know you know that, but I just had to make sure. This Tempo is really delicious. It's gin, lemon, mint. I'm not really much of a mint guy, but it's very subtle and just refreshing. So it's a wonderful summer drink if you're looking for one. Okay, let's get started. Today's case is a blood boiler. The lives that were taken in this case is absolutely preventable. It should have preventable. You'd figure I'd already recorded this and I should know how to talk this time around. Maybe it's the gin. As I was saying, this was absolutely preventable and it should have never happened. It's a strong reminder that consequences for sexual predators are not even close to being harsh enough. Let's lock up all the pot dealers though. As far as I'm concerned, it's non-existent and I don't know how many more victims we need until something changes. Today we're talking about the terrifying murders of two college students who had their whole life ahead of them. Their names were Rachel Newhouse and Andrea Crawford. Rachel Lindsay Newhouse was born to her father Philip and mother Montel. P.S. How awesome is the name Montel for a woman? I love it. She had an older brother named Travis and a younger sister named Ashley. Rachel was the daughter you dreamed of, her parents said. She was a straight-A student at Irvine High School in Orange County. She was intelligent, kind, popular, beautiful, hardworking, and just all around a good person. To top it off, she was athletic and a member of the track and soccer team. She just truly checked all of the boxes. Her friend said she was the friend that would drop everything if they ever needed her. And her parents appreciated that she wasn't the rebellious type. She had very high expectations of herself, so she stayed out of trouble. In 1998, she was a Cal Poly student majoring in nutrition, and she was living with roommates in San Luis Obispo, California. She and her roommates were very close. They did a lot together. It wasn't just like a roommate situation. They were friends. It was often that they would go and hang out together in the evenings, and that's what they were doing on the evening of Thursday, November 12th, 1998. That night, Rachel and her roommate Andrea went out for dinner and drinks at a local Mexican restaurant called Tortilla Flats. It was a pretty popular Mexican restaurant, primarily known for the margarita situation. They had dinner prior, and then it sounds like the restaurant also had a pub side. So around midnight, she's feeling a little bit tipsy and emotional because her and Andrea had just gotten into an argument. Both of them were only 20, and the legal drinking age, I believe, across the United States is 21. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Canada, some areas it's 18 and some it's 19. But in California anyways, it was 21 and the girls were only 20. So they were doing the whole trick where I don't know if they still do this, where they stamp your hand if you leave the bar briefly and then you don't have to, re-check in and get your ID out and all that. So one of their friends who was 21 got the stamp, and then they licked the stamp and then they stamped it on themselves. Do they not do this? And I just feel super old right now. So Rachel, hers worked. She got in with no question, but Andrea didn't. But Rachel didn't notice that Andrea didn't go in because she just went straight to her friends and kind of carried on with the night, just figuring Andrea was also mingling. So it wasn't until about an hour later that Rachel goes to the washroom, and then she sees Andrea is still standing on the restaurant side, and she's really unhappy that she didn't notice that she didn't get in with her. They kind of went back and forth. Rachel just said, I'm not doing this anymore, and she left the bar completely. And Andrea had drove them there that day, and Rachel was not going to be asking for a ride back home. So she was determined to walk herself home. She had to cross this bridge called Jennifer Street Bridge. Apparently this bridge is pretty intimidating even in the daylight. It's very dark and just an intimidating structure altogether. So I can't imagine what it would have been like in the evening, but Rachel's just focused on getting across it because at that point she's, in the home stretch. With her focus on just getting home, she doesn't even notice that when she gets to the top of the bridge, there is a figure off to the side. As she gets up closer, she's completely caught off guard, and there's just this look of terror as she's looking at this person who's wearing this Halloween mask that is this creepy skull. Before she even has a chance to react, she's hit and she's knocked unconscious. The next morning, a girl that's walking on the bridge notices this small pool of blood in an area, and then that there is blood marks leading down the stairs close to the parking lot, and then they just stop. She calls the police and they come to collect whatever evidence they can, but unfortunately there was no surveillance cameras or anything like that on the bridge or in the area, so they have nothing to go off of. The same day, Rachel was supposed to work as a hostess at her job at SLO Brewing Company, and she also worked there with her other roommate, a girl named Nicole. When she doesn't show up, her manager goes to Nicole and he asks if she's seen Rachel that day, and that just kind of hits her like, oh yeah, no, I haven't, and that's very unlike Rachel. Immediately she called Rachel's family. They started calling friends. By the next day, there was a missing persons report filed, and there were hundreds of missing person posters just plastered all throughout the community. They also had multiple search dogs looking for her. They had a helicopter in the area, and then their whole search and rescue team. And a large part of why the police were so quick to react on that scale was because 2 years prior, Kristen Smart was also a Cal Poly student, and she had gone missing after a night out at a party. That case has only recently been solved. So in those early days, everyone was quite panicked because they thought they were connected. The police are trying to do their best to just keep the situation calm. They even enlisted help from the FBI. There was reward money coming in from so many different directions. There were celebrities. A lot of the fraternities were doing fundraising. People throughout the community started donating. I believe there was over $100,000 for a reward for any leads bringing Rachel home. I think a lot of people felt like Rachel was their daughter or their niece or their friend. There was just that connection. And it really hit home that this could happen to anybody. Even though it felt like everybody was involved, nobody could find Rachel. At this point, her family is just holding hope that the blood that was found on the bridge is just an innocent explanation and has nothing to do with Rachel's disappearance. But unfortunately, 3 weeks after she disappeared, the DNA came back and it was positive that it belonged to Rachel. The police, they're still trying to keep everybody calm. They're saying, yes, okay, this is her blood, but it doesn't mean that it's something suspicious. There's still a chance that she can come home safe and sound. They really wanted people feeling safe, but 4 months after Rachel disappeared, it was clear that the public very much needed to be cautious when on March 11th, a 21-year-old student named Andrea Crawford went missing from her home. Andrea Lynn Crawford was born Andrea Eberhardt to her mom Gail and father Jim on July 10th, 1978 in Paso, Washington. Her parents divorced when she was only 6 months old, and after they divorced, Gail and Andrea moved to Gail's parents' house in Fresno, California. Her parents were over the moon to have their granddaughter living with them. They got all those little baby snuggles in every day, and they sound like they're your warm and fuzzy, precious grandparents, and Andrea loved growing up in their house just as much as they loved having her there. As a child, she was the one who would get in the dirt, play with bugs. She'd freak out if anybody killed a bug in front of her. But she was also this graceful little ballerina with mad skills. When she was a child, she was in the Nutcracker and Alice in Wonderland. Her dreams were to become a professional ballerina, but unfortunately, when she was 16 years old, she suffered an injury and the pain in her toes just couldn't recover. That was really hard for her to process. Up until that point, she was a great student, high achiever, but then after that injury, she just kind of lost her zest for life and didn't really know what her new direction was supposed to be. Eventually, things slowly started to come into place when she found an outlet in riding horses, and she would enter barrel racing competitions and then started winning awards. She also knew her way around the wrenches, so she liked to fix up cars as well. It sounds like she was one of those girls who, if she put her mind to something, not only did she just do it, she was like a natural and really, really good at it. Those who knew her said her personality was tenacious, so that's no surprise that she always excelled in what she wanted to do. She was the person who wasn't going to let anybody or anything get in her way. She wasn't a bully by any means, but if she felt like she was being pushed around or taken advantage of, she'd stand up for herself. Things were starting to look up for her, and in 1996, she and her mom moved to Clovis, California. She worked her patootie off, she got her grades up, she graduated, and after graduation, she moved out on her own to San Luis Obispo, California. At 21 years old, she was attending Cuesta College. I hope I'm saying that right. Her goal was to transfer to Cal Poly, where Rachel and Kristen attended. Her grades weren't quite where they needed to be yet, but she was grinding. It was only a matter of time before she would get in there. In the meantime, she got a cute little duplex on her own, and she was working at a place called Craig & Auto Parts to pay her bills. On March 11th, it had been about 4 months since Rachel's disappearance, and Andrea was at home. She was talking to her friend till about 2:45 a.m. and then hung up the phone and crawled into bed. Within the hour, Andrea woke up to hearing her cat Riley meowing really loudly. Riley had just had surgery, so she thought maybe something was wrong and he was in pain. So she got up to go check on him, got him feeling comfortable, and then was heading back to bed. Before going back into her bedroom though, she opens up the bathroom door and she just freezes when she sees a man standing in front of her with a pair of pantyhose on his head. Before she even has a moment to react or scream, this intruder lunges at her and knocks her unconscious. While she was out, he tied her ankles and her wrists together. He also put duct tape on her mouth so that she couldn't scream when she woke up, and then also went to her room and grabbed a pillowcase to put over her head so that he wouldn't be identified. While she's out, he gathered a bunch of her things and put them in his truck. And then when he comes back, he sees that she's awake. She's struggling to get herself free, and he's nervous that somebody's going to hear her. So he just picks her up, tosses her over his shoulder, and then runs and puts her in his truck and drives away. The next day, her mom, Gail, had been trying to get a hold of her throughout the day. She was paging her nonstop, and Aundria would always return a page. Initially, she doesn't want to get too worked up. She just figures, she's been a mama bear, overthinking things. But then she finds out that Aundria didn't attend an appointment that she was looking forward to. So she makes the decision to act quick. And around midnight, she contacts the police to file a missing persons report. Like they did with Rachel, the police were really quick to react. But part of this was because they figured Aundria was just out with her friends, forgot to touch in with her mom, and there was an innocent explanation. So they just wanted to kind of squash it before everybody started to get reworked up again. As the days went on though, and Aundria's still missing, that's exactly what happened. Everyone starts panicking. They're saying someone's out there targeting college students. But whenever it was brought up to police, they would say that there was no evidence that the two were connected. Luckily, it wouldn't take long for that theory to be proven incorrect, and that in fact, Rachel and Aundria's disappearances were connected. It started on March 16th when a parole officer was just at the gym and he comes across a write-up in the newspaper about Aundria's disappearance, and for whatever reason, it just triggered him. And I mean, he's dealt with the worst of the worst when it comes to people, and he hadn't had this reaction before, if not ever. But while he's reading this story, one of his parolees jumps out in his head and he thinks this guy knows something. His parolee was a 33-year-old named Rex Allen Krebs. He was a sex offender who had recently been released from Soledad State Prison, and he had just been released after serving 10 years of a 20-year prison sentence for sexual assault of one woman and attempted sexual assault of another. Rex was born on January 28, 1966 in Sandpoint, Idaho, to his father, Alan, and mother, Connie. Connie had had a baby girl 3 years prior when she was 16, so he had an older sister, and his parents were young, so they depended a lot on their families to help them. Rex's parents had moved in with each set of parents during those early years of Rex's life, until Alan got a job working with a railroad company and moved to Leicester, Washington. Unfortunately, his dad struggled with holding down a job, so the family relocated a lot. And then the inconsistency of having a paycheck just led them back to living with Rex's grandparents quite often. His parents turned to the bottle quite a bit, which didn't bring out the best in them. They would often fight, and then that escalated to the point of Alan becoming physically abusive to Connie. The kids said they spent a lot of their time just huddled up in each other's room, covering each other's ears so that they wouldn't have to hear the arguments. And then when there was 2 more children added to the family, this just added to the pressure and tension going on. Not to mention one of the children had mental limitations, which also caused a lot of stress. Connie finally found the strength to leave Alan and met someone who she thought was her Prince Charming, and they got married, but he turned out to be just as awful as Alan. And not only was her new husband Bob being physically abusive to Connie, but he also was to Rex. He felt like Rex resembled Alan a lot, and that bothered him, so he just took out his anger on him. His abuse was really cruel too. He would do things like make Rex wear his soiled underwear if he had an accident in it on the top of his head. He'd also make him sit on his little sister's baby training potty for hours. He had also been forced to wear a diaper at school, which is super humiliating. As he got older, Rex became defiant, and it got to the point where Connie didn't think that she could handle it anymore, so she drove him out to live with his dad when he was in the 5th grade. Rex really struggled out there. His dad was living on a farm, and that wasn't really his vibe. He didn't know what to do. He also struggled tremendously with making friends. He didn't have the best hygiene, and his clothes kind of looked disheveled. And he was one of those kids where the other students targeted him because if you pushed his buttons enough, he just exploded and became enraged. And then they thought that that was, humorous to continue laughing at. He spent a lot of time in the principal's office, not because he was in detention or anything, but he found her very comforting. Unfortunately, this didn't lead to an opportunity for him to kind of go down a different path. As he got older, he just became more rebellious. And then he started exhibiting pretty disturbing behavior. It started in 1979 when he's only 13 years old, and he snuck into his neighbor's house while she and her daughter were away running errands. And he goes into the daughter's room and starts to pleasure himself. And they walk in and find him like this. They scream, he panics, he runs out, and the police came to arrest him, but the neighbor said she didn't want to press charges. Instead, she wanted Alan to take him for psychiatric evaluation. I know I've said multiple times with confidence, psychic evaluations. Why am I like this? It's really embarrassing being me sometimes, you guys. Anyways, this neighbor said she didn't want to press charges. She wanted him to grow from it. So go and see a doctor. And Alan agreed, but then he only took him to one appointment and then never took him back. The following year, Rex was caught making inappropriate prank phone calls to a woman in their neighborhood, and Alan found out about this, and then his solution, instead of taking him for help, was to just beat him mercilessly. And this pattern would continue. Rex would get in trouble. He would do things like get caught stealing, fighting at school. When Alan would find out, he'd beat him up. And each time it kept getting more intense. When he was 15, he threw this big piece of scrap metal on the train tracks and then hid to watch what was going to happen. And I mean, we all know what happened. The train derailed. Luckily, the conductor was safe, but that could have been so much worse. He was caught and charged, and Alan was notified. And at this point, he realizes his son needs help. He brings him to a mental hospital, and Rex stays there for about a month. His doctors who evaluated him found that he had antisocial behaviors, and a lot of his issues were stemming from his family relationships. So their recommendation was they remove him from his parents' home, and he was placed in a group home in Idaho called Idaho Youth Ranch. After he was there for about a year, things seemed to be helping. He was having an easier time controlling those impulses of rage. He was also starting to feel more social once he felt like he could trust people, so he was making friendships. He even started playing basketball. He was doing so well that he actually earned an opportunity to go to another group home, and this one was geared more towards people who weren't going to go back to their home life with their parents. It gave them more independence, a little bit more freedom. And since his family had never even come to visit him once at the group home, his counselors thought, okay, this is the best way for him to succeed. And it seemed like he was. He went to high school, he got a job, he was making friends, he was getting good grades, and I think he was feeling confident in what he had learned. So he thought, okay, well, I'm good now, so I want to go back home and try to live with my dad again. At this point, his dad had a new lady that was living with him with her daughter, and she really liked Rex. She said that he was nothing but kind to her, and he was very nice to her younger daughter. Her issue with Rex being in the house was how Alan treated him. She thought that he didn't deserve any of what his father dished out to him. It was a daily occurrence that Alan would call Rex worthless, a piece of shit, a bastard. This man himself is just disgusting. He's also the man who would mock his own daughter who had disabilities. Yeah, I can't. Tempo time. So a year after Rex returned home from the group home, all of the progress that he had made had pretty much erased itself, and he became even worse. It became very clear that he was much more dangerous now on February 3rd, 1987, when he was only 17 years old. That night, he had plans to meet his friends to go play some video games at an arcade, and they did. And at one point during the evening, they started drinking, got pretty intoxicated, and then met and continued drinking with two girls who were 14 and 12 years old. Rex started putting the moves on the 12-year-old girl, and she turns him down. She's like, I'm absolutely not interested, and tells him, I'm 12 years old. He does not care though. He is very persistent, and at one point the two of them veered off from their friends, and out of nowhere, without warning, he just attacks her and tries to assault her. Several times she was able to get away from him and tried to run, but he'd catch back up to her. And at one point they fell down this hill and she smokes her head on this rock that's at the bottom. And out of nowhere, he just snaps out of it and says, "I'm sorry, please don't tell anybody." She gets up though. Thank God she wasn't too injured from hitting her rock. That could have been awful. And she runs straight to the police and tells them. When the police bring him in for questioning, he tells them that he did hang out with this girl, but he was too drunk to remember anything that he did. Since that excuse is absolute trash, he's arrested and charged with attempted rape. He pled guilty in court and, ready for this, served 36 days out of a 90-day sentence. 90 days seems too fast for the couples on 90 Day Fiancé getting married, okay? Angela and Michael are still out here 90 years after them meeting and they still aren't married. And this guy got out of his sentence in 36 days. Tempo time. It gets more infuriating because 2 months after his release, he's charged with grand theft for stealing a vehicle. And then he's sentenced to 3 years. Don't even get me started on how trying to steal a car is worth more prison time than the assault of a 12-year-old child. So after serving this sentence, he decides he's not going to go back with his dad. He wants to go and live with his mom in California. She had a new husband at the time. They converted a room above the garage for him so he had his privacy. He got a job at Wendy's. Another soft spot for me because Wendy's is my favorite, and how dare he try to tarnish the name. While he was there, he met a girl who was also working there and they quickly formed an intense relationship that after a week of knowing her, he proposed to her. Luckily, that didn't go anywhere because he told her that he had actually previously been engaged to a girl named Lisa, and Lisa was raped and murdered, and that's why he stole this vehicle that he went to jail for stealing, because he said he wanted to get into the prison where the person who did this to Lisa was, and he's going to kill him. And so he got in there and he killed him. And I don't know if he thought that this was going to impress her or what, but it backfired and she called things off. Thank goodness. Unfortunately, what this did was it really angered him. And a week later, on May 24th, 1987, a 21-year-old single mother meets Rex Krebs. That night, she was just at home, bored. Her kids were with a sitter and she thought, okay, I'm gonna get out and I'm gonna do something. And her roommate had a job at a lounge that wasn't too far from the house, so she decided to go hang out with her on her shift, have some drinks, and she stayed until close. But while her friend did all of her closing duties, she said, "I'll just head back home, you meet me there when you're done." What she didn't know was Rex had seen her and he was waiting for her to follow her home. As soon as she got back, she just went straight to her room, crawled in and fell asleep. And she said 45 minutes after, she woke up to someone putting their hand over her mouth telling her not to scream. This guy had a knife to her throat that he took and cut off all of her clothes with. He then tied her up and assaulted her. During the attack, they hear this loud jalopy type car. It was her roommate. Her muffler was broken and this girl says, "That's my roommate." So he just looks at her and says, "Have a nice day," and then he leaves. As soon as her roommate walks in, she runs out of her room. She's still tied up. Her roommate gets her untied, calms her down, and they immediately go to the police station to file a report. But unfortunately, she didn't get a good description of her assailant's face, so there wasn't anything for them to go off of. A month later, a single mother was also woken up in the middle of the night, and this woman had her daughter in bed with her. The intruder had a screwdriver held to her eye, and she said, "Please don't hurt me, don't hurt my daughter, go and grab my purse and wallet and take whatever you want." And he just said, "I don't want any of those things, I want you." Her poor daughter wakes up, she's terrified. Her mother's able to say, "Hide under the bed." As her attacker is assaulting her, she asks if they can move to another room so that her daughter's not right there. He agrees, and as they're leaving, she sees this big hunting knife that's on the ground, so he must have dropped it when he came in her bedroom. And she quickly tries to get away from him and grab the knife. She goes to stab him, but unfortunately it was just like a nick. It enrages him, but She's not giving up. She just fights for her life. She's able to get out of the house, and she starts screaming for her neighbors to call the police. He ended up getting so scared that he just ran out the back door. And this time there was witnesses that saw a man get into a Volkswagen Beetle. They didn't see who he was, but they had a description of a vehicle at least. An hour after this attack, the police get a call from a 7-Eleven about a drunken, disorderly patron there. When police arrived, he's looking a little bit disheveled. His clothes are ripped. He's got like some cuts on his forehead, and they say, you know, what's this all about? And he says he had gotten quite drunk with his friends earlier, and police had handcuffed him and threw him to the ground, and he cut his forehead. They're thinking, no, it's because you just ran away from the scene of an attempted rape, so they bring him in for questioning. When they show the victim the photo of him, she said it was too dark that she couldn't positively identify him. And this could have been a really scary situation because this wasn't Rex. This was just a random guy who seemed to be just having a bad night. But that situation could have gone sideways, and he could have gone to jail for a crime he didn't commit. A few weeks later, she comes back to the detective and she says that she remembered something a little bit odd that happened at her house about a month before the attack. She said there was this young guy who was working on her neighbor's garage, and he came over to her house and said, hey, you know, if you are single and you don't have a husband and you need me to help with your garage, you know, I'm free right now and I can do it. And without even thinking about it, she said, oh, yeah, no, that's great. I'm divorced. I'm a single mom, so I appreciate it. And she was having problems with her garage. The door wouldn't fully close. There was like a crack open. And so this guy fixed it for her. After he was done, he gave her his card, and she still had the card. So she gives it to the detectives, and it's for Grover City Doors and Supply Company, and the employee's name on it is Rex Krebs. When they run the name, they see Rex has a vehicle registered to him, and it's a Volkswagen Beetle. They go to his house, and when they get there, they see he's got some scratches on his nose. They say he needs to come in for questioning and to submit fingerprints pertaining to a recent sexual assault, so he agrees. When they ask him about the injuries to his face, he says that he got into an argument with somebody who was leaning on his car. They ask him if he ever worked on a garage with the victim's address, and he says no, not that he could recall. The detective shows him his own business card that he left with the victim, and he says, well, you know, you left this for her. And then he says, oh yeah, I remember, but I never went back there. Then they show him this knife that was left at the scene that he dropped, and he also dropped his hat during this scuffle, and they ask him if it's his stuff. He says yes, but that it was left in his vehicle and somebody must have gone and stolen them. Which also makes you think, if that gentleman that was at the 7-Eleven wasn't able to prove, you know, where he was, or if he'd stolen a vehicle in that time, could have been evidence showing, you know, maybe some reasonable doubt that it wasn't him who did this. Thankfully, though, this little girl who was with her mama was able to positively identify Rex, and so then he was arrested and charged. He did eventually come clean about that attack and also about the attack that happened on the woman prior. He said in that case he had noticed her because they were at the same bar, and he said she just looked through him and it hurt his feelings. And since he felt like trash, he decided to wait for her and then follow her home. He went under an evaluation, and he did say in this interview that he hoped that he could use the time that he's in jail to figure out why he did the things that he did and just become a better person. But that went nowhere because he didn't attend any of the counseling meetings in jail. He said he didn't want the other inmates to know that he was a sex offender. That's pretty much just a walking death sentence. So he told them that he was there for murder so that they wouldn't beat him up or try to kill him. And then that made him not go to these counseling sessions to get help. So after serving only 10 years of his 20-year sentence, he's released, and this is where he's assigned a parole officer to check in with. That's the officer that had this gut feeling that somehow he was involved in Aundria's disappearance. Despite the outside looking like things were going pretty well for him. He had a job, he was working in construction, he had a girlfriend. But this officer knew that his rape cases had involved breaking and entering, and they sounded very similar. So he decides to go check in with Rex at his house in Davis Canyon. When he pulls up, Rex is actually outside and he limps towards him. The officer sees he's limping. He says, you know, what the heck happened to you? And Rex said that he fell off this wall into some firewood. He says, oh, okay, well, I'm here because I'm doing a random urine test. Rex says, of course. He gives him the sample and calls it a day. The next day, he goes back and says that he's doing this random parole search to make sure that he doesn't have anything in the house that's against his conditions. While he's looking around, he finds a BB gun, which is very much in violation of his conditions. So he leaves the house and he goes to report it to the police department. And he says, this is irrelevant. This is just to get you in the door. I am convinced that this man knows something about Andrea Crawford. Initially, the detectives didn't think too much of it, but it's their job to follow up, do their due diligence. They go to his job where he's working at 84 Lumber, and they tell him that he's in violation of his conditions because he had a BB gun. And so they arrest him and they bring him down for questioning. When they get there, they ask him, do you know why you've been arrested today? And he says, I'm sure it has something to do with the missing women because I am a registered sex offender. He says he's not involved and he doesn't have anything to hide, so he's in full cooperation of them going to his property and looking around. And the detectives knew from talking with Aundria's mom and her friends some of the items that were missing. She was missing a Korn CD. Oh my God, I remember the Korn CD. A George Strait CD. There was a few VHSs missing, and she also was missing this Magic 8-Ball keychain that she always had with her. Initially, nothing's turning up, but then they find this little box of just miscellaneous items, and inside of it is mini Magic 8-Ball. It's not on a keychain, but you can tell it was one because it had the little metal, clippy thing to clip to. And then when they search his truck, they find spots of blood, binoculars, duct tape, some stain remover, and then one of the jump seats in the back of his truck was missing. I feel like at this point you should just spray paint "I'm shady as shit" on the side of your vehicle. So he's shown this keychain and he says that he just found it randomly somewhere. Then they tell him somebody has identified his vehicle being in the area, and he says, oh yeah, she lived on Branch Street, right? I have friends there. I was there that night, but I didn't see her. Of course not, Rex. At this point, he knows, anything he says is just going to get himself in more trouble, so he tells them that he's done talking. A month later, on April 22nd, the detectives come back and they tell Rex, we found the jump seat that was missing from the back of your car, and it has Rachel's DNA on it. So at this point, they were investigating Andrea's disappearance, and now they have this seat with Rachel's blood. Rex just looks at him and says, what do you want me to say? And the detective says, the truth. So he tells them on the night of November 12th, he was drinking quite heavily. As he was leaving the bar driving home, he spotted Rachel, who was walking by herself. He says he thought she was pretty, so he just decided to follow and watch her, and he notices that she's headed towards this bridge. He drives ahead and he parks his truck in the parking lot, and he grabs his Halloween mask that he still had in the car, races up the steps, and he said he waited for her at the top. He said when she came up the stairs, he caught her off guard and hit her. And before anybody could find them, he dragged her all the way down the stairs and he put her in the back of his truck. While she was still unconscious, he tied her up and he drove her to this abandoned cabin that was quite close to his house. He said by the time they arrived, she had woken up. She was fighting for her life. He sexually assaulted her, and then he left and went home for about 20 minutes. And he said when he came back, she was dead. He tried to say that because she was tied up and there was rope kind of connecting everything together, like from her neck to her wrists to her ankles, that while she was struggling, she must have gotten the rope too tight around her neck and essentially did it to herself. Whew, it's painful. The blood, this was a terrible jacket to be wearing today. The wool is not serving for the blood boiling. He said he left her there overnight and he dug a hole in the area where he usually chopped wood, so it was kind of disturbed in that area anyways. And the next evening he went back to get her and then he buried her. When it came to Aundria, he said on March 11th, he was sitting in his truck drunk. He had been following Aundria and spying on her for about a week prior. He just happened to be driving through her neighborhood one day and he saw her get out of her car. He noticed her, watched her walk up to her duplex, so he knew where she lived. And then 2 times that week, he spied on her in the evening, which is so eerie to think about. You just have no idea that someone's just creeping and peeping through the windows. The night of the 11th, he went back to her house and he sees it's all dark. So he decides to try and open up the doors. None of them are unlocked. So he turns to leave, but as he's leaving, he looks back and he sees that there's this small little tiny bathroom window and that's open. So he grabs the pantyhose that he brought because, he wasn't going to do anything, but he had pantyhose. Come on, Rex. Pops them over his face and he starts to crawl in this window. This is actually where he injured himself. So when his parole officer saw that he was limping, it's because the window was so narrow, but he was so determined to get in that he cracked ribs to get in. Once he got in, that was around the time that Andrea's cat started meowing because he heard the cat and he said he just froze, considered leaving, but didn't because, again, victim blaming. Aundria opened up the bathroom door and froze just looking at him, and he panicked in the moment, and so he just attacked her and knocked her unconscious. He admits to stealing souvenirs around the house and putting them in his truck, and then by the time he came back, she was awake. So he put her over his shoulder, put her in his truck, and then he also took her to this abandoned cabin. That night, he said he left her there and went back home, and in the morning when his landlord left to work, he went and got her from the cabin and brought her back to his house. He had still been drinking from the night before. He said that he continued drinking. He assaulted her. He'd carry on drinking again. Occasionally, he would stop to have a nap. And it was one of these times that he had fallen asleep that he woke up to the sound of her trying to leave. He said he immediately sprang up and strangled her to stop her. She was also buried on the property. He buried her right under his window. Don't even get me started how disgusting this guy is. So 5 months after Rachel went missing and 1 month after Aundria did, they were both finally brought home to their loved ones. After their discovery, the community is just livid that he was even out free. Rightfully so. Among those just as shocked and surprised who had no idea was Rex's girlfriend, who happened to be pregnant. I can't even imagine what that would have been like processing. And when he was asked by the detectives, to elaborate and give some insight into maybe why he did what he did, he just said, if I'm not a monster, then I don't know what I am. He said there was an element of rage to his attacks, but for the most part, it was fulfilling a fantasy, which is just so effed up. Like, why are people like this? What the fuck is wrong with people? On March 19th, 2001, his trial started. The defense definitely went the whole he was a victim himself route because of his upbringing. We've said it before on the channel, we'll say it again. There are unfortunately so many situations where somebody grows up in a very similar situation as Rex did. And while that is not okay at all, no child should ever have to grow up like that. It's also not a reason to murder somebody completely innocent. The only explanation he could really give when he took the stand at trial was that he had a hatred for women stemmed by his hatred for his mother, who made him go and live with his dad, who, by the way, at this point had been arrested himself for drug trafficking charges. I guess the only positive thing about having stiffer drug laws than apparently if you're a sexual predator is that at least this guy is locked up too. Rex said whenever he drank, the evil Rex came out, and it wasn't him. It was just the rage that he had towards his mother that would come out and project on other women. The jury was in deliberation for 4 days and they came back with a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to death on May 11th, 2001. And all in all, this just all goes back to the fact that this is such a huge tragedy and a miscarriage of justice that totally could have been avoided. These women deserved to have their lives. He should have still been in jail. Even if he was going to be released early, that should have never happened if he didn't receive counseling. It was ordered after his release that he was supposed to see a doctor, but that in itself was a joke. The appointments were scheduled, I think, once a month or once every other month, which is ridiculous. That is not enough. For crimes like this, you should be seeing somebody once every week, if not maybe multiple times a week, at least to start off with. To this day, Rex is still on death row, and as far as I know, as of May 2022, there isn't an execution date that's been set. I was happy to find out that the bridge that Rachel was taken from now is equipped with cameras. That should have been a thing. Yeah, this case really got to me. I mean, all of them do, but you know what I mean. And every year, Big Guy and I, we donate to a charity. And so this year, we decided in honor of these women, we are going to donate to the Take Back the Night rally. It's a action against a sexual violence organization. I will leave the link to that in the description below if you want to check out the work that they do. And yeah, that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You know, it means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. Thank you again to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video. I will leave the link to download June's Journey for free in the description as well. The answer to today's riddle, today, it's the tempo. Just a quick reminder, a girl throws a ball as hard as she can. It comes back to her, even though nothing and nobody touches it. How? And it's because she didn't throw it like this. She threw it straight in the air. So it came back. All right, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.